Hi guys, today I'm working on a heart block and these are the fabrics I'm using. I'm working with scraps from my stash. I went through and pulled out all the floral strips I could find, and I also grabbed a bunch of solid fabrics. I decided that I'm going to cut a whole lot of 3-inch squares and get them prepared. The florals will be for this project and the solids are for another project. I'll be using a light pink for the background, so I went ahead and prepared a bunch of 3-inch squares of the light pink fabric as well. Once I was done that, I laid out some squares of the light pink fabric and drew lines diagonally. I'll be pairing these up with the florals to make tiny little half square triangles. Okay, I've got my half square triangles prepared. I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. I sewed a line along the diagonal line I drew, and then I sewed a stitch parallel to the diagonal line, giving myself a generous 1/4-inch seam allowance. Once I was done sewing all of the squares together, I went ahead and trimmed them, kept them in 2 separate piles. I plan on using the larger of the half square triangles for the project I'm working on today. And then I pressed the blocks open nice and flat. Okay, so I went ahead and prepared my half square triangles, and these ones worked out really well. I don't have to trim dog ears, but on these squares, I do have to trim them. I don't plan on using these squares for this project, so I'm just gonna leave these aside, but I'm happy that they're prepared. This block is fairly easy. It just uses half square triangles and regular squares. I'm using 3-inch squares, and I love how versatile a half square triangle is. Once I had all my pieces prepared, I went ahead and started laying out my pattern. I thought I wanted to use some solid blocks in the center of the heart to add some interest to the pattern, but then I decided that it was too much of a contrast against the delicate fabric and print, so I decided against it. Once the block was fully assembled, that's when I realized that I don't like it at all. So I went ahead and made a pinwheel instead. Once I was satisfied with the placement of the pieces for the heart, I started working on the border. I have a bunch of half square triangles left over, but I don't have enough for the entire border of this block. I just have enough for the top and the bottom. So I went ahead and placed the pieces. I have them all facing in the same direction, not doing anything fancy there. And it was at this point that I decided that those solid blocks weren't going to work. So I replaced them with half square triangles, and I played around a bit and ended up extending the pinwheel, and I think it looks pretty cool. It actually worked out really well. I thought I wanted to use those solid blocks for the border, but then I decided that that was definitely not going to happen. This block was just too delicate for those bright solid colors. Those colors are so bold and they would be perfect for a different project. But for this project, I'm using really soft florals and pinks, light pinks, and bold colors definitely don't complement it well, in my opinion. I like the way the block is looking now, so I went ahead and sewed it up. I started with the bottom row and I'm working in little sections. Even though I'm working with a simple pattern in small pieces, it's really easy to get mixed up. So I try to work in small sections at a time to make sure that I don't have to undo stitches. I sewed all the pieces together, starting with pairs, and then I ended up with rows. Once I got to this halfway point, I decided to press the blocks nice and flat and trim them up one more time to make sure that I would have perfect seams. Once I was done trimming the blocks, I started laying out the pattern again, making sure that the orientation was good, and once I was satisfied with it, I went ahead and did the final assembly. I started with the strips at the middle of the block, and I'm sewing the rows together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once I was done, I went ahead and straightened up the block one more time to make sure that my seams would be perfect. I added the pink border first and I trimmed the block as I went along. I'm also finger pressing. Well, I'm using the back of my rotary cutter to press. I find it works really well for pressing seams. So I went ahead and trimmed and pressed the block as I went, and once I was done adding the pink border, I went ahead and gave the block one more good press before I added the final border. For the final border, I started sewing the sides first. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance again, and I sewed the sides, trimmed them down, and then added the top and bottom borders. I wanted to use as much of the half square triangle fabric as I could because it's really pretty. And here is my final block. I think it's so pretty. The colors are so soft and beautiful, and the contrast is just perfect. I'm glad I didn't use any of the solids. Thanks for checking out my video, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!